My aunt turned my trauma into a joke, then punished me for feeling hurt. I'm still in shock. I thought escaping danger was the worst part, but nothing prepared me for the emotional slap that came from someone I trusted. When I needed comfort, she gave me cruelty wrapped in sarcasm. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who would run for her life, heart pounding, lungs burning, feet barely touching the ground as the sound of gunshots echoed through a place I once felt safe. But that's exactly what happened 1 month ago today. It was an ordinary afternoon at Florida State. I had just finished a seminar and headed to the student union for a quick bite. I remember exactly what I ordered, what song was playing on the radio, even what shoes I was wearing. Funny how your mind clings to the most useless details in moments of trauma. I was mid-bite into a bland turkey sandwich when the first shot rang out. At first I didn't register it. A loud pop, then another, then screaming, chairs crashing, someone yelling, "Run!" And before I knew it, the entire cafeteria turned into chaos. People knocked over tables, dropped their food, clutched their phones in shaky hands. I stood frozen for a second, heart stalling in my chest. Then instinct or something primal, maybe survival, took over. I ducked, crawled beneath the nearest table, then bolted towards the hallway. My legs felt like jelly, but I moved. I had no idea where I was going, just away from the sound. I could hear more shots, more screams. Someone stumbled beside me and fell. I kept going. The front doors. That was my only focus. By some miracle, I reached them. I don't even remember how. I just remember bursting out into the Florida heat, gulping air like I had been underwater. My car was parked down the street. I ran the entire way, flung the door open, and slammed it shut behind me, locking it as if that would somehow protect me from the horror still unfolding behind me. I didn't even think. I just drove. I sped off campus, barely remembering to hit the turn signal. I kept driving until I reached my office building about 10 minutes away. I parked, locked the doors, locked myself inside my small office, collapsed into my chair, and finally allowed the panic to settle in. That's when my phone began to vibrate nonstop. Calls, texts, voicemails. Everyone I knew was trying to find out if I was alive. I started replying, hands shaking so hard I could barely type. I told my mom I was safe. My friends, my lab partner, people I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me on Facebook. The news was already covering it. People were dead, injured. The campus was on lockdown. And then came her message. My aunt, 77 years old, loud, brash, always needing to be the center of attention. She didn't text me privately. No, she added me, my cousin's wife, another aunt, and even some of her friends into a group chat as if this were some kind of social event. My cousin's wife was kind enough to ask, "Are you safe? Are you okay?" I replied, "Honestly, I'm off campus now, locked in my office. Safe." Then my aunt chimed in. Instead of comfort, instead of empathy, she made a joke. She brought up the time my dad had survived a shooting decades ago when I was only 3 and compared it to what had just happened to me. Then she typed, almost proudly, "Luck of the Smiths. How about that?" I stared at the screen in disbelief. How could anyone, let alone family, say something so thoughtless? I had just escaped a massacre. I was still trembling, still in shock, still hearing the screams and gunshots ringing in my head like some broken record. And her response, to turn it into some twisted family anecdote, like we were characters in a sitcom, like trauma could be passed down like a quirky genetic trait. I didn't know whether to scream or cry, so I did both. I called my mom, barely able to speak through the tears. She was already in a state of panic after hearing about the shooting, and when I told her what my aunt said, she lost it. Within minutes, my mom created a new group chat with that same aunt, another one of her sisters, and my cousin's wife. She tore into my aunt with the kind of fury only a mother can channel. She accused her of using our family's pain as fodder for attention, of always turning the spotlight back on herself, of being insensitive beyond belief. For the first time that day, I felt protected, seen. My mom stood up for me in a way that meant everything. "I could have lost my daughter today," she said, "and you think this is some cute family coincidence?" After we ended the call, I sat in my office for a long time, just thinking, numb. I couldn't go home yet. I didn't feel safe anywhere. My heart kept skipping beats. My thoughts kept spiraling back to those sounds, those faces, the moment I didn't know if I'd live. Later that night, my aunt sent me a message, an apology, or so she claimed. "I'm sorry if what I said upset you," she wrote. I was just trying to be supportive. Then came the kicker. She told me I was no longer invited to the Disney trip she had planned for me, my cousin and his family. She said she didn't want to be a victim of my mother's mouth again, as if she was the one who had been hurt, as if she had something to fear. That was the moment I realized I was done. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I just blocked her number. Blocking my aunt should have felt satisfying, final, like closing a door that should have been shut long ago. But instead I sat on the edge of my couch, my phone in my hand, staring at the now empty message thread, feeling more broken than before. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional beep from a distant car outside. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. My family was spread across different states. No one nearby. No arms to fall into. No warm embrace. Just me, my memories, and the unbearable stillness of survival. I tried to sleep that night, but my brain wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that cafeteria, hearing the gunfire, feeling the stampede, seeing the fear in people's faces. I wasn't just reliving it, I was trapped in it. At 3 a.m., I got up, made tea with shaking hands, and stared out the window like something might suddenly make sense. It didn't. Instead, my mind kept circling back to what my aunt had said. Luck of the Smiths. How dare she? As if what happened to my father had been some charming family footnote. As if my trauma was some badge we wore at reunions. She had always been like this. The kind of person who twisted other people's pain into stories she could tell over dinner. I had forgotten how deeply her insensitivity ran. Or maybe I had just wanted to believe she'd changed. But trauma strips away illusions. It tears down everything fake, everything fragile. In the span of a day, I lost not just a sense of safety, but a part of my family too. The next morning, I called my mom again. She didn't say hello. She just answered with, "How are you feeling today, baby?" I didn't have an answer. Worse, I admitted. Not because of what happened, but because of what came after. She didn't need clarification. She knew exactly who I meant. "You don't need people like that in your life," she said gently. I know she's family, but sometimes blood isn't enough. Her words stuck with me all day. At school, the campus was eerily quiet. Students shuffled around like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, flinching at loud noises. There were grief counselors set up in one of the lecture halls, but I wasn't ready to talk. Not to them. Not yet. I went to my lab, closed the door, and cried again. I thought about my dad, how he must have felt all those years ago, how he never really talked about it, just left it locked inside like a box too painful to open. Now I understood why. Because once the box opens, the air changes. People treat you differently. And worst of all, some use it as a stage. My cousin's wife texted me later that day. She apologized for my aunt said she didn't agree with her at all. That meant something. A flicker of kindness in all the noise. I told her thank you, but I didn't want to talk about it anymore. Not with anyone who was even remotely connected to her. But even after blocking my aunt, she still found a way to linger in my mind. That Disney trip had been planned for months. She'd invited me out of nowhere like some peace offering, and I had accepted because, well, part of me still craved her approval. I thought maybe in her old age, she was mellowing out. I thought maybe I could have the kind of aunt-niece relationship I'd seen in movies. What a joke. She never cared about me. Not really. What she cared about was the image she could project to others. The doting aunt, the generous matriarch. She gave gifts so she could talk about giving them. Took people on trips so she could hold it over their heads later. And now that I'd called her out indirectly through my mom, she did what narcissists do best. She retaliated. Disinviting me wasn't just petty. It was cruel. She knew I had been looking forward to that break, to some kind of joy after all the darkness. But no, she couldn't handle being the villain in someone else's story. So she tried to punish me. I started to see the pattern. The truth. This wasn't new behavior. This was who she had always been. I had just refused to see it because I wanted to believe family meant something. That age softened people. That love could grow from history alone. But trauma reveals everything. She saw my near-death experience as a moment to make herself relevant. She couldn't let it be about me, my fear, my survival, my healing. She made it about her. That night I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in months. I wrote every memory I could recall, both of the shooting and of her. The time she embarrassed me at a family wedding, the time she insulted my mom in front of guests, the subtle digs, the not-so-subtle digs, the countless moments she made others small so she could feel big. I didn't write out of anger. I wrote to let go. I needed to see it, on paper, in ink, the truth of who she was and who I was becoming, and who I wasn't going to be anymore. The weekend came and I didn't leave the apartment. I didn't want to see anyone. Didn't want to explain anything. The shooting had already made me a point of conversation on campus. People looking at me like I was some survivor exhibit, whispering about who had been where, who had heard what, who had cried the hardest. But none of them knew what it was like to survive twice, once physically and once emotionally, the second time at the hands of your own family. I stayed curled under a blanket on the couch, watching mindless shows, my phone on silent. Notifications came and went. I ignored them. Except for one, a long message from my cousin. He said he didn't know what had happened between me and his mom, my aunt, but that he hoped we could all find peace soon. I stared at his words for a long time. Peace. Funny how people who aren't hurt always want peace. As if it's this magical middle ground between an apology and forgetting. But peace for me meant distance, silence. No more pretending that her behavior was just a quirk of old age or a generational difference. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up the phone and called my dad. It took him a few seconds to answer, the usual rustling, the deep breath, and then his voice came through rougher than I remembered. "Hey, baby girl." "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice already cracking. "Do you have a minute?" We hadn't talked much about what had happened, not since the day of the shooting. He had sent a text, a heart emoji. That was it. I assumed he didn't want to bring up his own trauma, but I needed him now. I needed to understand. "I can't stop thinking about you," I said. "About what you went through when I was little." There was a long pause on his end, then a sigh. "I've been thinking about you too," he said. "Every damn day." I told him everything. The panic, the running, the texts, the gut punch of my aunt's message, the tears, the betrayal. He listened, didn't interrupt once. And then he said something I'll never forget. "You're allowed to cut people out even if they share your blood." That sentence hit like a thunderclap. He went on to explain how after his own incident years ago, his sister, my aunt, had done something similar. Turned his pain into a talking point, joked about it at dinners, said things like, "What a wild story," right as if he'd lived through a car chase instead of a nightmare. He told me he'd forgiven her back then because he didn't want to fracture the family. He thought silence was the cost of love. But that silence ate me alive, he admitted. Don't let it eat you too. For the first time in days, I felt something close to clarity. This wasn't just about me. This was generational, repeating. My aunt hadn't changed. She had just found a new person to hurt in the same way. That night I wrote a letter, not to send, but to say everything I couldn't say out loud. Aunt, you took my survival and made it a punchline. You took my pain and turned it into a performance. You tried to reduce me to a story that made you feel interesting. But I'm not your story. I'm not your tragedy to retell. I'm a living, breathing human being who almost didn't make it. And instead of asking me how I felt, you made it about you. I don't owe you forgiveness. I don't owe you my presence. And I definitely don't owe you silence anymore. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and felt lighter than I had in weeks. Still, the hurt lingered. My friends noticed. They asked why I hadn't been coming out, why I looked so tired. I gave vague answers at first, but eventually I told one of them, my best friend, the whole story, start to finish. And when I finished, she didn't try to rationalize my aunt's behavior. She didn't say, "She probably meant well." She just looked at me and said, "That's horrible. I'm so sorry." Sometimes validation is the most healing thing in the world. The Disney trip came and went. I saw the pictures on Facebook, smiling faces, matching shirts, my cousin's kids holding Mickey balloons. My aunt looked exactly the same. Happy. Performed. Untouched by the wake of destruction she'd left behind. And you know what? I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel left out. I felt free. Because sometimes surviving isn't about making it out alive. It's about deciding what and who you'll never go back to. The days passed and life started to blur again. Not back to normal, but into a strange, fragile rhythm of pretending things were okay. Campus had resumed. Classes were half full. Security presence had tripled. But nothing could make me feel safe again. I still jumped at loud noises. I still froze when someone walked too quickly behind me. And worst of all, I couldn't stop replaying what my aunt had said. Not just once, but over and over, like a needle stuck in the same groove of a record. Luck of the Smiths. How about that? It wasn't just tone deaf. It was cruel. It was a kind of cruelty that didn't care how much you bled as long as it made someone laugh or look clever for a second. But the part that haunted me the most wasn't her words. It was how no one really called her out. Not the cousin. Not the other aunt in the group chat. Not even some of the people who had liked her post later when she vaguely mentioned our scary family week on Facebook. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about her being toxic. This was about the entire family learning to live with toxicity and calling it tradition. For years, my aunt had been allowed to speak over people, make jabs that stung, pull guilt trips disguised as favors, and everyone just tolerated it because she's older or she means well or you know how she is. But I wasn't going to be part of that silence anymore. Still, something strange started happening. Even though I had blocked her number, she found other ways to reach me. A forwarded email from my cousin saying Aunt really misses you. A voicemail from my other aunt gently reminding me that we're all family at the end of the day. And even one handwritten card. Yes, a real card delivered to my mailbox with a cartoon cat on the front that read, "Forgive and forget, sweetheart." I stared at it for 5 minutes before throwing it away. Because here's the truth. No one wants to say out loud being family doesn't give you a free pass to break someone's heart. And forgiveness isn't a button you press just because someone says, oops. I hadn't just survived something terrifying. I was still surviving it every day. And instead of asking what I needed, she asked for absolution. For her. Not for me. It was all starting to unravel even further. A mutual friend of my mom and aunt reached out next. A sweet older woman who meant well, but whose message made my blood run cold. I'm sure she didn't mean to hurt you. She just wanted to lighten the mood. Lighten the mood. That mood, that day. Those siren screams and the pounding in my chest. It was the clearest sign yet that no one truly heard me. They just wanted things quiet again. No more family group chat drama. No more awkward silences at holidays. Just sweep it all under the rug and call it peace. But I had stopped playing that game. One afternoon, my professor asked me to stay back after a lecture. I thought I was in trouble for missing a deadline, but instead he gently asked if I needed a few weeks off. He had seen the list of students impacted by the shooting. My name was on it. He said he noticed I hadn't spoken up in class since that day. I don't remember exactly what I said, just something like, "I'm managing." But after I left his office, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone completely unrelated to me had seen the pain I was carrying and didn't try to dismiss it. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't ask if I'd forgiven anyone. He just acknowledged it. And in that moment, I realized that that was what I needed most. Not fake apologies, not guilt trip cards, not forced reunions at Disney. Just space and truth. That weekend, I sat down with my mom on a video call and told her everything I'd been feeling, including the guilt. The part of me that wondered if maybe I should forgive. That voice in the back of my head that kept whispering. She's old. She's family. Don't hold a grudge forever. But my mom, who had seen her sister's worst for decades, leaned forward and said something fierce and freeing. There's a difference between holding a grudge and holding a boundary. And you, my love, are holding your boundary. It was the first time in weeks I could breathe deeply without feeling like I owed anyone an explanation. The grief didn't vanish. The flashbacks still crept in. But something inside me had shifted. I had spent so much time wondering if I was overreacting when really I was underprotecting myself. And that, I decided, would change. After setting firm boundaries with my aunt, I realized something painful but necessary healing wouldn't come from forcing family to change, or from pretending the wounds didn't exist. It had to come from choosing myself. I blocked her on every platform. I stopped responding to any indirect messages. It was hard. A tug of guilt and loneliness threatened to pull me back every day. But each time I reminded myself, my safety, my mental health, and my peace were not negotiable. The aftermath of the shooting lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. I found therapy helpful, a space to unpack the trauma and the layers of family pain tangled with it. I learned that survival wasn't just about running from bullets. It was about facing the scars left behind and deciding how to live beyond them. My mom and I grew closer than ever. She was my anchor, the voice of reason, love, and fierce protection. She understood the complicated threads between love and pain, family and boundaries. Together, we navigated the difficult balance of mourning what was lost and protecting what still mattered, my future. Sometimes I thought about the aunt who could joke so coldly in my moment of terror. Was it ignorance, cruelty, or her own kind of pain? I don't have all the answers, but I learned that understanding doesn't require acceptance. Family is complicated, messy, and sometimes cruel. But it doesn't have to define who I am or how I heal. This experience forced me to confront uncomfortable truths that some people will never see your pain, or worse, will use it for their own gain. That trauma doesn't just affect the moments when bullets fly, but the long, quiet aftermath that follows. And that survival means more than escaping harm. It means building a life where you can finally feel safe again. I'm still healing. Some days are darker than others. But I know this. I am more than the fear. More than the jokes at my expense. More than the family drama that tries to consume me. I survived the shooting. And now I'm surviving myself. What was your reaction after hearing this intense and emotional story? Did it make you reflect on the importance of family support and compassion? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you found this story powerful, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, heartfelt stories like this. Your support means a lot.